Josiah Miller didn't just marry off his daughter, he traded her away as a cruel punchline. Adeline stood on a freezing train platform in the Montana Territory, clutching a single suitcase, knowing she was nothing more than damaged goods to her father. He had promised the groom a flawless beauty, but sent the scarred, unwanted daughter instead, convinced the terrifying mountain man would simply discard her to the wolves. He thought he was sending a burden to her doom. He was wrong. He was sending a warrior to the only man wild enough to appreciate her. This is a story of betrayal, survival, and a revenge that runs colder than the winter snow. The mirror in the hallway of the Miller estate in St. Louis was an antique imported from France, or so Josiah Miller liked to boast to his business partners. It was gilded, flawless, and hung specifically to catch the light of the chandelier. Adeline avoided it. She had learned to walk past it with her head turned slightly to the left, a practiced motion to ensure she never caught a glimpse of the right side of her own face. Adeline was 24, an age that in 1885 labeled her a spinster. But it wasn't her age that kept suitors away. It was the jagged, silvery burn scar that ran from her right temple down to her jawline, a souvenir from a kitchen fire when she was 12, a fire she had put out to save her younger sister, Lucinda. "Addie, stop dawdling!" The voice of her father, Josiah, boomed from the study. Adeline flinched, shifting the stack of linens in her arms. She wasn't treated as a daughter in this house. She was an unpaid housekeeper who happened to share the family bloodline. She entered the study. Josiah was sitting behind his mahogany desk, swirling a glass of amber whiskey. Standing by the window was Lucinda, looking like a porcelain doll in lavender silk. Lucinda was beautiful, spoiled, and the apple of Josiah's eye. She was everything Adeline was not. "You called for me, father?" Adeline asked, keeping her scarred cheek turned away from him. "I have news," Josiah grunted, tossing a piece of parchment onto the desk. "I have found a match for you." Adeline froze. The linens felt heavy in her arms. A match? For me? Lucinda stifled a giggle by the window, turning to hide her smile behind a lace fan. "Don't look so shocked, girl," Josiah sneered. "It wasn't easy. God knows with that face of yours I had to call in favors. But there is a man out in the Montana Territory, a wealthy landowner. He wrote to an agency looking for a sturdy wife to manage his household. I sent him your details." "My details?" Adeline asked, her heart hammering. "Did you tell him about—" She gestured vaguely to her face. Josiah waved his hand dismissively. "I told him you were capable. That's all a man like that cares about. He's a recluse, lives in the mountains. He needs a worker, not a show pony. It's a generous offer, Adeline. He's paid for the travel." Adeline looked at the floor. A recluse in the mountains. It sounded lonely, terrifying even. But it also sounded like an escape from the sneers of her father, the pitying looks of the townspeople, and the constant servitude to Lucinda. "When do I leave?" she whispered. "Tuesday," Josiah said, taking a sip of his drink. "Pack light. You won't need silk where you're going." Later that night, as Adeline packed her modest trunk, Lucinda lounged in the doorway, watching her. "I saw the letter, you know," Lucinda said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Adeline didn't look up. "What letter?" "The one father sent. He didn't send your picture, Addie." Adeline stopped folding her grey wool dress. She turned slowly. "What do you mean?" Lucinda smirked, examining her fingernails. "He sent mine. The portrait from my 18th birthday. The one with the blue ribbon." The heir left the room. "Why would he do that?" Adeline asked, horror creeping into her chest. "When I arrive, this man, he'll see me. He'll send me back." "That's the funny part," Lucinda laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. "Father says by the time you get all the way up into those mountains, the snows will have set in. This man, Silas Kincaid is his name, won't be able to send you back until spring. And by then, father says, Maybe you'll have made yourself useful enough that he won't bother. Or maybe he'll just toss you to the wolves. Either way, Father saves the cost of your upkeep for the winter." Adeline stared at her sister. It wasn't a marriage arrangement. It was a disposal. They were tricking a man on the frontier, a man likely dangerous and hard, by promising him a beauty and delivering the damaged goods. It was a joke, a cruel, dangerous joke, and she was the punchline. "He'll kill me," Adeline whispered. "Oh, don't be dramatic," Lucinda yawned, pushing off the door frame. "Just keep your hair down over that side. Maybe in the dark he won't notice the difference." Adeline sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling. She looked at the small, foggy window. She could refuse. She could run away. But where? She had no money, no trade, no friends. St. Louis was a city of appearances, and she had none. A strange resolve hardened in her stomach. Silas Kincaid. The name sounded like jagged rock. If he was a beast, then perhaps they would understand each other. She had lived with monsters her whole life. At least this one lived in the honest open air instead of a velvet-draped parlor. She finished packing. She didn't pack for a wedding. She packed for a war. The journey took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of soot-choked trains, rattling stagecoaches, and finally, a mule-drawn cart, driven by a man with no teeth who smelled of chewing tobacco and old onions. The landscape had shifted from the green, rolling hills of the Midwest to the vast, flat plains, and finally to the imposing, jagged teeth of the Rockies. The air grew thinner, colder, biting at Adeline's exposed skin. By the time the cart rattled to a halt, they were in the shadow of a mountain that seemed to block out the sun. It was a place called Blackwood Ridge, a territory so remote it wasn't even on the map the conductor had shown her in Denver. "This is it, missy," the driver grunted, spitting a stream of brown juice into the snow. Adeline looked around. There was nothing. Just a crude wooden sign that read Kincaid's Crossing, nailed to a pine tree, and a small, dilapidated lean-to shelter meant for mail drops. "Where is the town?" Adeline asked, clutching her coat tighter. Her grey wool dress was woefully thin against the mountain wind. "Town?" The driver laughed, a wheezing sound. "Ain't no town. Kincaid's cabin is up that trail, about 4 miles. He don't come down for the post but once a month. You better hope he's expectin' ya." He's not meeting me here." "Kincaid don't meet nobody. He pays me to drop supplies here. I drop 'em. I leave. That's the deal. If you're smart, you'll get walking before the sun dips. Wolves get hungry round twilight." Before Adeline could protest, the driver tossed her trunk onto the frozen ground, whipped the mules, and rattled away back down the pass. Adeline stood alone in the silence. It was a silence so profound it hurt her ears. The wind howled through the pines, sounding like whispering voices. She looked at the trail, a narrow, snow-dusted path winding up into the dark timber. "Josiah Miller," she said aloud, her voice cracking, "I will dance on your grave for this." She dragged her trunk behind her. It was heavy, and the snow was slick. She walked for what felt like hours. Her boots were soaked through. Her scarred cheek throbbed in the cold. Every snap of a twig made her jump, envisioning bears or mountain lions. Just as the light began to fade, turning the sky a bruised purple, she smelled wood smoke. She crested a ridge and saw it. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress of logs and stone. A massive cabin built with oversized timber, sitting in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. A plume of smoke rose from the chimney. Adeline stumbled toward it, her legs numb. She reached the heavy oak door and pounded on it with a frozen fist. "Mr. Kincaid!" she called out. "Mr. Kincaid, please!" Silence. Then the sound of a heavy latch lifting. The door swung open. Adeline had to crane her neck back. The man standing in the doorway blocked out the light from the fire behind him. He was a giant, at least 6'4", with shoulders that spanned the width of the doorframe. He wore buckskins and a heavy fur coat. His hair was long, dark and wild, and a thick beard covered half his face. But his eyes, piercing, icy blue, stared down at her with intense hostility. He held a rifle in one hand, the barrel pointed loosely at the floor, but ready. "Who are you?" His voice was a low rumble, like thunder deep underground. I'm Adeline," she stammered, her teeth chattering. "Adeline Miller." The giant frowned. "Miller?" "Josiah Miller's daughter," she clarified, trying to stand taller. The bride. You sent for a bride." Silas Kincaid didn't move. He didn't step aside to let her in. He just stared at her, his eyes narrowing as he scanned her face. She knew what he was seeing. The wind had blown her hood back. The scar was on full display, angry and red from the cold. He looked her up and down, seeing the thin coat, the soaked boots, the shivering frame. "Miller said he was sending a woman," Silas growled. "Not a half-frozen bird?" "I assure you," Adeline said, a spark of anger cutting through her fear, "I am stronger than I look. Are you going to let me in? Or are you going to let me freeze to death on your porch?" "I was told you were a gentleman." Silas snorted. It was a dark, humorless sound. "You were told wrong?" He stepped back, leaving the door open. It was an invitation, barely. Adeline dragged her trunk over the threshold and collapsed onto the bearskin rug in front of the massive stone hearth. The warmth hit her like a physical blow. She heard the door bolt shut behind her. She looked up to see Silas watching her. He wasn't looking at her with desire. He was looking at her with confusion and something darker, suspicion. He walked over to a table and picked up a piece of paper. He held it up. It was the letter from her father. And clipped to it was the photograph. Lucinda's photograph. Silas looked at the picture of the blonde, flawless, smiling girl. Then he looked down at Adeline. Dark hair, sharp features, and the jagged scar disfiguring her face. "This is the woman I paid for," Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned the photo toward her. "This ain't you." Adeline felt the shame burn hotter than the fire. "No," she whispered. "That is my sister, Lucinda." Silas crumpled the photo in his massive fist. "So Miller thinks me a fool, or a charity case." He took a step toward her, his shadow engulfing her. "Why did he send you? To mock me? Or did he think a man living among the wolves wouldn't know the difference between a thoroughbred and the one kicked out of the stable?" Adeline scrambled to her feet. Her fear was gone, replaced by the bitter sting of her reality. She was done cowering. "He sent me because he wanted to get rid of me," she shouted, her voice echoing off the rafters. "He sent me because I am ugly and unmarriageable, and he wanted to keep the pretty one for a rich banker in St. Louis. He thought you were a savage who wouldn't care, or that the snow would trap me here so you couldn't send me back until spring." She stood chest to chest with him, though she had to look straight up. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be traded like a sack of grain. But I am here, and I can work, I can cook, I can clean, and I can mend. I have more grit in my little finger than Lucinda has in her entire body. So if you want to throw me out into the snow, go ahead. But don't you dare look at me like I'm the one who lied to you." The room went silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and Adeline's ragged breathing. Silas stared at her. For a moment, she thought he might strike her. His blue eyes bore into hers, searching for a flinch. She didn't give him one. Slowly, the tension in his shoulders dropped. A strange expression crossed his face. Not softness, but respect. "You got a mouth on you, little bird," he grunted. He turned away and walked to the kitchen area. He ladled stew from a pot into a wooden bowl and slammed it down on the table. "Eat," he commanded. "The spare room is in the back. There's a lock on the door. Use it." He grabbed his rifle and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Adeline asked, stunned. "To chop wood," Silas said, not looking back. "If you're staying, you'll need heat. And if Miller thinks he can play games with me—" He paused, his hand on the latch. "He'll learn that the only thing more dangerous than the winter is me." He slammed the door, leaving Adeline alone in the warmth, the smell of venison stew filling the air. She touched her scar, her fingers trembling. He hadn't sent her away. Not yet. And for the first time in her life, a man had looked at her scar and hadn't looked away in disgust. He had just looked angry on her behalf. Adeline sat at the table and took a spoonful of stew. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. The first week at Blackwood Ridge was a war of attrition. The enemy was not the wolves or the biting wind, but the silence between two strangers trapped in a snowbound cabin. Adeline woke the first morning to an empty bed and a cold hearth. The fire had died down to embers. Her breath plumed in the air as she dressed in the dark, her fingers stiff. She expected to find Silas in the main room, but he was gone. His tracks in the snow outside led toward the tree line, disappearing into the white void. He had left her no instructions, no food prepared. It was a test, she realized. He expected her to sit and weep until he returned, proving her uselessness. Adeline tied her hair back, ignoring the mirror, and set to work. She started with the hearth, coaxing a roaring fire from the embers. Then she turned her attention to the cabin. It was a bachelor's den in the truest sense, functional but neglected. Dust coated the mantel, the windows were grime-streaked, and a pile of furs in the corner smelled of wet dog. She found a bucket and a brush. She scrubbed the floors on her hands and knees until the wood grain shone. She organized the pantry, tallying the supplies: dried venison, sacks of flour, coffee beans, and jars of preserved peaches. It was enough to last the winter, but only if rationed carefully. When Silas returned at dusk, a deer carcass slung over his shoulders, he stopped in the doorway. The scent of pine cleaner and roasting meat hit him. He dropped the deer with a heavy thud, his eyes scanning the room. The floor was clean, the table was set, the fire was roaring, and Adeline was standing by the stove, stirring a pot of beans and salt pork, looking exhausted but defiant. Silas wiped the snow from his beard. He walked to the table and ran a finger along the surface. No dust. "I didn't ask for a maid," he grunted, moving to the wash basin. "You asked for a wife," Adeline countered, not turning around. "Or at least you paid for one. Since I am here, I will earn my keep. I won't be a parasite, Mr. Kincaid." "Silas," he corrected, splashing freezing water on his face. "Mr. Kincaid was my father. He was a mean son of a bitch. I'd prefer not to be reminded of him." It was the first personal thing he had said to her. Over the next month, a routine formed. Silas would leave before dawn to check his trap lines or hunt. Adeline would tend the cabin, bake bread, and mend the tattered clothes she found in his wardrobe. They spoke little. Their conversations were transactional. Pass the salt. The wood is low. A storm is coming. But Adeline noticed his eyes on her. When she sat by the fire in the evenings, sewing, she could feel his gaze. It wasn't the look of revulsion she was used to. It was curiosity. He was studying her, like he studied the tracks of a bobcat. The shift happened in mid-January. A blizzard had been raging for 3 days, burying the cabin up to the windows. The wind sounded like a freight train screaming over the ridge. Silas had gone out to the barn to check on the horses, ignoring Adeline's plea to wait for a lull in the storm. An hour passed, then 2. Adeline paced the floor. She knew the rule: stay inside. But the wind was howling with a ferocity that shook the heavy timbers of the cabin. Suddenly the door burst open. Silas stumbled in, a gust of snow following him. He fell to his knees, clutching his left side. Blood was soaking through his heavy coat, dark and alarming against the wet fur. "Silas!" Adeline screamed, rushing to him. "Tree limb!" He wheezed, his face pale beneath his beard. "Snapped in the wind. Caught me. Good." He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. Adeline caught him, her small frame straining under his massive weight. "Lean on me," she ordered. "Come on." She dragged him to the rug before the fire. He was shivering violently, shock setting in. Adeline worked quickly, her hands steady. She stripped off his heavy coat and cut away the flannel shirt beneath. The gash was deep, running along his ribs. It wasn't life-threatening if treated, but it was jagged and bleeding freely. "I need whiskey," she said. Silas pointed weakly to the cabinet. She grabbed the bottle and a clean cloth. "This will hurt," she warned. Silas gritted his teeth. "Just do it." She poured the alcohol over the wound. Silas let out a roar that rivaled the wind outside, his back arching off the floor. Adeline didn't flinch. She cleaned the wound, her fingers moving with practiced precision. "You've done this before," Silas rasped, watching her through half-closed eyes. "My sister was clumsy," Adeline muttered, threading a needle she had sterilized in the fire, "and my father was impatient. We didn't have a doctor. I learned." She began to stitch. Silas watched her face. She was close to him, the firelight dancing on her skin. For the first time, he was seeing her from inches away. He looked at the scar on her cheek. Up close, it wasn't ugly. It was a map of survival. The skin was silver and tight, but her eyes above it were a warm, melted chocolate brown. "How did it happen?" he asked softly. Adeline's hand paused for a fraction of a second. "A kitchen fire. Grease. Lucinda knocked the pan over. I pushed her out of the way." "And she got the portrait," Silas said. "And you got the scar." "That is the way of the world, Silas. The pretty ones get the portraits. The useful ones get the work. You saved her," he said, the realization settling in his voice. "You took the fire for her." Adeline tied off the knot and snipped the thread. She sat back, wiping her bloody hands on a rag. "She is my sister. I loved her. I didn't know then that she would grow up to hate me for reminding her of what she almost lost." Silas reached out. His hand, calloused and rough as bark, touched her unscarred cheek. Then slowly, his thumb moved across her face and traced the line of the burned scar. Adeline froze. She stopped breathing. No one had ever touched it. Not her mother, not her father. It was the mark of shame. "It's not ugly," Silas whispered, his blue eyes intense. "It means you're brave, Adeline. Braver than any man I've ever known." The air in the cabin shifted. The cold was forgotten. The storm outside ceased to exist. There was only the heat of the fire and the heat of his hand on her face. Adeline turned her face into his palm, closing her eyes, a single tear tracking through the rugged terrain of her skin. "Rest," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You need to heal." She moved to pull away, but Silas caught her wrist. "Stay," he said. "Please." Adeline hesitated, then lay down on the rug beside him, covering them both with the buffalo robe. That night, as the storm raged, she slept with her back against his chest, his rhythmic breathing the only lullaby she needed. The wall between them hadn't just cracked. It had shattered. By February, the dynamic in the cabin had changed entirely. Adeline was no longer the unwanted guest. She was the heart of the home. And Silas. Silas was a man waking up from a long hibernation. He began to shave his beard down, keeping it neat. He started carving wood in the evenings, small figures of horses and birds, which he would silently leave on her bedside table. They moved around each other like a choreographed dance, anticipating needs before they were spoken. But as the snow began to melt, revealing patches of brown earth, a shadow loomed over Adeline. The spring meant the pass would clear. The spring meant the deal was over. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed over the mountains, Silas spoke up. "The snow is receding," he said, packing his pipe. "Yes," Adeline said, a knot forming in her stomach. "I suppose the mail cart will be able to get through soon." "Is that what you want?" Silas asked, looking at the horizon. "To go back? I have money. I can buy you a ticket to anywhere. You don't have to go back to St. Louis." Adeline looked at him. She wanted to scream, "No, I want to stay here with you." But fear held her back. Did he want her? Or was he just being honorable? "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. Then stay, Silas said roughly. He turned to her, his eyes vulnerable. Stay here. With me. Marry me, Adeline. For real this time. Not because of a contract your father wrote, but because I don't want to wake up in a cold house anymore. Adeline's heart soared. She opened her mouth to answer, to tell him that she had loved him since the night of the storm, but a sound from the valley floor stopped her. Barking dogs. The rattle of a carriage. Silas stood up instantly, his hand going to the Colt revolver at his hip. Someone's coming. It was too early for the mail. The mud was still thick on the trail. A black carriage, reinforced for rough travel, pulled into the clearing, flanked by 2 men on horseback, carrying Winchesters. Silas stepped in front of Adeline, pushing her towards the door. Get inside. Get the rifle. The carriage door opened, and a man stepped out. He was dressed in a pristine grey suit, seemingly immune to the mud. He wore a bowler hat and carried a silver-tipped cane. He wasn't Josiah Miller. "Mr. Kincaid," the man called out, his voice oily and smooth. "A pleasure to finally meet the legend of Blackwood Ridge." "Get off my land," Silas warned, his hand hovering over his gun. Now, there's no need for hostilities," the man said, smiling. "I am Garrett Halloway. I represent the Blackstone Mining Consortium, and indirectly, Mr. Josiah Miller." Adeline, peering through the window with the rifle in her hands, felt her blood run cold at her father's name. "I don't know you," Silas spat, "and I'm done with Miller." "Are you?" Halloway chuckled. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "Because according to this deed transfer, pending the tragic insolvency of your estate, Mr. Miller is a primary stakeholder in this land." Silas frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I own this land, free and clear." "You did," Halloway corrected. "But when you accepted let's call it the dowry package regarding his daughter, you signed an agreement acknowledging receipt. Buried in that agreement, page 4, paragraph 3, was a clause. In the event of your marriage to his daughter, the land titles merge. In the event you don't marry her and return her, you forfeit the land as a penalty for breach of contract. And if she were to disappear, well, the land reverts to the next of kin, her father." Silas went rigid. He turned slowly to look at the cabin window where Adeline stood. "He played you, son," Halloway grinned. "He didn't send you a bride. He sent you a Trojan horse. He knew you were a recluse. He knew you wouldn't read the fine print of a city lawyer's contract. He wants the copper deposits under this ridge, Kincaid. The girl was just the key to the lock." Silas looked back at Halloway. "She knew?" "She's his daughter," Halloway shrugged. "You tell me. Did she try to leave? Did she try to stay? Did she worm her way into your bed to make sure you signed the papers?" Adeline burst through the door, the rifle leveled at Halloway. "He's lying, Silas. I knew nothing of this. My father hates me." Halloway looked at Adeline, feigning surprise. "Ah, the lovely Adeline. Your father sends his regards. He was quite worried you might have failed in your seduction. But seeing as you're still here, I assume the trap is sprung." Silas turned to Adeline. His face had closed off. The warmth was gone, replaced by the icy walls she had met on the first night. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice dead. "Silas, look at me," Adeline pleaded, ignoring the men with guns. "He sent me here to die. He sent the ugly daughter because he didn't care if I survived the winter. This is just his greed. I am a pawn just like you." "A pawn who ends up with half my land?" Silas growled. "I don't want your land," Adeline cried. "I want you." "Touching," Halloway interrupted, "but legally irrelevant. Mr. Kincaid, you have 2 choices. You can sign the mineral rights over to us now and keep your cabin and your bride. Or we can evict you. We have the sheer manpower and the law on our side." Silas looked at the 2 armed men. Then he looked at Adeline. "Get your things," Silas said to her, his voice low and dangerous. "Silas, no. Get your things," he roared. "You want to go back to St. Louis? Go, I'm not signing anything. and I'm not keeping a spy in my house. I am not a spy, Adeline screamed, tears streaming down her face. Get in the carriage, Miss Miller, Holloway said, opening the door. We can take you to the train station. We have business to discuss with Mr. Kincaid that doesn't concern you. Adeline looked at Silas. He refused to meet her eyes. He was staring at Holloway with murderous intent. He was cutting her loose. Not because he hated her, she realized with a jolt, but because he was about to start a war. He was about to fight these men, and he knew he couldn't do it with her in the crossfire. But to Holloway, it looked like a rejection. Adeline lowered the rifle. She wouldn't leave him. Not like this. I'm not going, she said firmly. She cocked the lever of the Winchester. This is my home, and this is my husband. Common law, perhaps, but real enough for these mountains. If you want this land, Mr. Holloway, you'll have to bury us both to get it. Silas looked at her, shock breaking through his anger. He saw the way she held the gun. Steady, determined, lethal. She wasn't standing behind him. She was standing beside him. Holloway's smile faltered. He looked at the two armed guards, then at the giant mountain man and the scarred woman with the rifle. Have it your way, Holloway sighed, stepping back into the carriage. But remember, winter is over. The predators are waking up. We'll be back, Mr. Kincaid, and next time we'll bring the law. Or something worse. The carriage rattled away, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in its wake. Silas watched them go until they disappeared into the trees. Then he turned to Adeline. He didn't hug her. He didn't kiss her. You should have gone, he said, his voice ragged. They will kill us for this land. Let them try, Adeline said, her voice hard as steel. My father sold me to you, Silas. That means I belong here, and I protect what is mine. Silas looked at her, and a slow, dark smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a wolf who had found its mate. Then we better fortify, he said. It's going to be a long spring. The following 3 days were a blur of frenetic activity. The romantic silence of the winter was replaced by the grim industry of war. Silas Kincaid was no longer just a man. He was a general commanding a garrison of one. He boarded up the lower windows of the cabin with thick oak planks, leaving only narrow slits for rifle barrels. He moved the horses from the barn into a makeshift corral behind the cabin, knowing the barn would be the first thing to burn if the mercenaries returned. Adeline worked alongside him, her hands blistered but her spirit unyielding. She melted lead into bullets over the kitchen fire, the smell of hot metal replacing the scent of baking bread. She filled buckets with water and placed them strategically around the perimeter, a grim acknowledgement of her greatest fear. They won't come in the daylight, Silas told her on the third evening, checking the load of his Winchester 1873. Holloway is a city man. He hires cowards who like the dark. How many do you think he has? Adeline asked, snapping the cylinder of the Colt revolver Silas had given her. It was heavy in her hand, but it felt reassuring. Enough, Silas grunted, but they don't know the terrain. We do. Night fell like a shroud over Blackwood Ridge. The moon was hidden behind a thick bank of clouds, plunging the clearing into absolute darkness. Silas extinguished the lamps inside the cabin. They waited in the blackness, sitting on the floor with their backs against the rough logs. If this goes wrong, Silas whispered, his voice rough in the dark, there is a trap door under the pantry. It leads to a root cellar that tunnels out to the creek. You go, you run, you don't look back. Adeline reached out in the dark and found his hand. She squeezed it hard. I told you, Silas, I am not leaving. I spent my whole life running from mirrors and whispers. I am done running. Silas brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. It was a tender gesture that felt louder than a shout in the silence. Then the world exploded. A glass bottle filled with kerosene smashed against the front door, igniting instantly. The orange glare of the flames lit up the room through the rifle slits. Fire! Adeline screamed, the primal panic rising in her throat. The smell of smoke triggered a memory. The kitchen in St. Louis, the heat, the pain. She froze. "Adeline!" Silas roared, grabbing her shoulders and shaking her hard. "Look at me! This isn't the past! You control the fire now! Get the water!" His voice anchored her. She blinked, the flashback receding. "I'm on it." She grabbed the buckets. While Silas moved to the window, levering his rifle, Adeline soaked blankets in water and slammed them against the base of the door where the heat was seeping through. Crack, crack, crack! Bullets slammed into the logs of the cabin, sending splinters flying. Silas fired back through the slit, the boom of his rifle deafening in the enclosed space. Outside, a man screamed. "One down," Silas growled. "They're circling back," Adeline yelled, peering through a knot in the wood on the rear wall. "3 of them. They have torches." "Take the back," Silas ordered. "Aim low. Don't hesitate." Adeline rushed to the rear window. She saw the flickering lights of torches moving through the trees. They were trying to flank the cabin, to burn them out from all sides. Her hands shook as she raised the heavy revolver. She rested the barrel on the wooden sill. "Just like he taught me," she thought. "Breath in, breath out, squeeze." A figure burst from the tree line, winding up to throw a torch onto the roof. Adeline pulled the trigger. The gun kicked violently, numbing her wrist. The man outside dropped the torch and spun around, clutching his thigh. He fell into the snow, howling. "I hit him!" Adeline gasped, half in horror, half in triumph. "Good girl," Silas shouted, firing 2 more shots rapidly from the front. "They're falling back. They didn't expect teeth." But the reprieve was short-lived. A heavy thud shook the roof. "They're climbing," Silas hissed. "They're going for the chimney. They'll smoke us out." He looked at Adeline. "Cover the door. Shoot anything that moves." "Where are you going?" "Up," Silas said. He grabbed a hunting knife and opened the window. Before Adeline could protest, he vaulted out into the chaotic night. Adeline stood alone in the center of the room, the revolver pointed at the burning door. She heard the scuffle on the roof, heavy boots stomping, the grunt of exertion, the sickening sound of a body hitting the ground hard. Then silence. The flames at the door were dying down, the wet blankets having done their work. Adeline waited, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Silas," she whispered. The door latch clicked. Adeline raised the gun, her finger tightening on the trigger. The door swung open. Silas stood there, silhouetted by the dying embers on the porch. He was breathing hard, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead, but he was standing. "It's over," he panted, stepping inside and barring the door. "For tonight." Adeline dropped the gun and rushed to him, burying her face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tight it almost hurt. He smelled of smoke, sweat, and copper blood. "You went on the roof," she sobbed into his coat. "Had to," he murmured, resting his chin on her head. "Holloway sent 5 men. They won't be reporting back." He pulled back and looked at her. Her face was smudged with soot, her hair wild, her eyes wide. She looked like a Valkyrie. "You saved the house, Adeline," he said seriously. "You faced the fire." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Fear doesn't matter," Silas said. "It's what you do with it." He walked to the table and poured 2 shots of whiskey. He downed his in one gulp and slammed the glass down. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice hardening. "They'll come back with more men. They'll bring a cannon if they have to. Holloway wants the copper, and he wants no witnesses." "So we run?" Adeline asked, disappointment coloring her tone. "No," Silas turned to her, a cold light in his eyes. "We don't run. We hunt. Holloway is likely holed up in Silver Creek, waiting for his dogs to return with my scalp. If we stay here, we're sitting ducks. If we go there, we catch him sleeping." "Silver Creek is a day's ride," Adeline said. "It's full of miners and thieves." "And us," Silas said, handing her the second glass of whiskey. "Drink up, Mrs. Kincaid. We ride at dawn." Silver Creek was a festering wound of a town, carved out of the mud and rock, 10 miles east of the ridge. It was a place where hope went to die and greed went to thrive. The main street was a quagmire of slush and manure, lined with hastily erected saloons, a general store, and the Grand View Hotel, a misnomer if there ever was one, as the only view was of the slaughterhouse across the street. Adeline and Silas rode into town just as the sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the mud. They didn't look like the couple that had huddled in the cabin. Silas wore his long duster coat, his hat pulled low, looking every bit the dangerous outlaw. Adeline had traded her dress for a pair of trousers cut down from Silas's old clothes, a heavy coat, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. They looked like drifters, trouble looking for a place to happen. "Keep your head down," Silas muttered as they hitched their horses in an alleyway behind the livery stables. "Holloway will be at the hotel. It's the only place with clean sheets and expensive whiskey." "What is the plan?" Adeline whispered. "We can't just walk in and shoot him. The sheriff is on his payroll." "I don't need to shoot him yet," Silas said. "I need the contract, the one with your father's signature. If I destroy that, their legal claim dissolves. It becomes a simple land dispute, and without the contract, the territory judge will side with the squatter who's been there 10 years. "He'll keep it in a safe," Adeline reasoned. "In his room." "I'll go in the back," Silas said. "I'll climb the balcony." "No," Adeline said, grabbing his arm. "You're 6'4", and you look like you eat raw bears for breakfast. Everyone in this town knows you by description. You'll be spotted before you hit the stairs." Silas frowned. "And you?" Adeline adjusted her hat. "I'm a woman in a mining town. I'm invisible, or I'm a distraction. Either way, I can get up those stairs." "It's too dangerous," Silas growled. "So was the roof," Adeline countered. "Let me do this, Silas. I know how to navigate a rich man's world. I know how vanity works. Holloway is vain." Silas looked at her, struggling with his instinct to protect her versus the logic of her plan. Finally, he nodded. "I'll be in the alley beneath his window. If things go south, you break the glass. I'll come through the wall if I have to." Adeline slipped out of the alley and onto the boardwalk. She didn't walk with the shuffle of a servant anymore. She walked with the purposeful stride of a woman on a mission. She kept the right side of her face, the scarred side, tilted away from the street lamps. She entered the Grand View Hotel. The lobby was filled with cigar smoke and the murmur of business deals. Adeline walked straight to the front desk. The clerk, a spindly man with spectacles, looked up. "Room 204, Adeline said, her voice commanding. "Mr. Holloway is expecting me." The clerk looked her up and down. Her clothes were rough, but her voice was pure St. Louis aristocracy. It confused him. I wasn't informed of any visitors, ma'am." "Do I look like a visitor, you announce?" Adeline lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is a private matter. Unless you want me to shout his name and my business for the whole lobby to hear." The clerk paled. Holloway was a powerful man who tipped well for discretion. "Go right up. Second floor, end of the hall." Adeline ascended the stairs, her heart pounding. She found room 204. She pressed her ear to the door. Silence. She tried the handle. Locked. She reached into her hair and pulled out a long, sturdy hairpin. It wasn't as elegant as a key, but living in a drafty cabin with broken locks had taught her a few tricks. She wiggled the pin, feeling for the tumblers. Click! She slipped inside and closed the door softly. The room was lavish by frontier standards. A 4-poster bed, a velvet armchair, and a heavy oak desk. On the desk sat a bottle of brandy and a stack of papers. Adeline moved to the desk. She sifted through the papers. Mining surveys, payroll for mercenaries, bribes for the sheriff. But no marriage contract. She looked around. In the corner, a small iron safe sat on the floor. Locked, of course. Suddenly the doorknob rattled. Adeline gasped. There was nowhere to hide. The wardrobe was too far. The bed was too high. The door opened, and Garrett Holloway walked in, laughing at something over his shoulder. He closed the door and turned, freezing when he saw the figure standing by his desk. "Well," Holloway said, his smile vanishing, "this is unexpected." He didn't call for help. He was arrogant. He stepped into the room, closing the distance. "Adeline Miller," he sneered. "Or should I say the widow Kincaid? Did my men do their job? Is the beast dead?" Adeline stood tall, her hand drifting towards the pocket of her coat where the Colt rested. "He sends his regards." Holloway stopped, his eyes narrowing. "If he's alive, why are you here? Come to beg for mercy? Or did you realize the winning side pays better?" "I came for the contract," Adeline said coldly. "The one you tricked my father into signing. The one you're using to steal our home." Holloway laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You think you can just walk out with it? You poor, deluded girl." He moved towards the safe, blocking her path to the door. "You know, your father was right. You really are a nuisance. Ugly inside and out." He lunged for her, quicker than she expected. He grabbed her wrist before she could draw the gun. They struggled, knocking over the brandy bottle. Holloway was stronger, but Adeline was desperate. She clawed at his face, her nails digging in. "You little witch!" he shouted, slapping her hard. Adeline stumbled back, hitting the wall. The gun clattered to the floor, sliding under the bed. Holloway straightened his suit, panting. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a derringer, a small, lethal pocket pistol. He pointed it at her chest. "I was going to let the winter kill you," Holloway said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "But I suppose I can do it myself. It'll be a tragic story. The distraught daughter, grief-stricken, takes her own life in a hotel room." Adeline looked at the window. It was 10 feet away. "You forgot one thing, Holloway," she said, her voice steady, despite the gun pointed at her heart. "And what is that? I'm not alone." Crash! The window exploded inward in a shower of glass and wood. Silas Kincaid swung into the room on a rope he'd thrown over the roof gutter, his boots slamming into Holloway's chest with the force of a battering ram. Holloway flew backward, crashing into the wardrobe. The derringer fired wildly into the ceiling. Silas landed in a crouch, a knife in one hand, his eyes wild with fury. He looked like a demon summoned from hell. Holloway groaned, trying to crawl toward his dropped gun. Silas stepped on his hand, crushing it. Holloway screamed. "Where is it?" Silas roared, grabbing Holloway by the lapels and hauling him up like a rag doll. "The safe!" Holloway squealed. "It's in the safe. The combination is 4-18-5. Silas threw him onto the bed. "Open it, Adeline." Adeline rushed to the safe, spinning the dial. 4-18-5. The door creaked open. Inside lay a leather-bound folio. She opened it. There it was, the contract, signed by Josiah Miller and Silas Kincaid. "I have it," she cried. "Burn it," Silas ordered, not taking his eyes off Holloway. Adeline grabbed a match from the desk, struck it, and held it to the corner of the heavy paper. They watched as the ink curled and blackened, the legal chains binding the land turning to ash in the hotel room. "You're making a mistake," Holloway gasped, clutching his broken hand. "Miller will destroy you. He has connections. Miller is in St. Louis," Silas snarled, leaning close to Holloway's face. "And you are leaving. Tonight, if I ever see your face in the Montana Territory again, I won't be as polite as to kick you through a wardrobe. Do you understand?" Holloway nodded frantically, sweat pouring down his face. "Good," Silas said. He turned to Adeline. "Let's go." They backed out of the room, Adeline clutching the ashes of the contract in the metal waste bin she had caught them in, just to be sure. They ran down the back stairs, the adrenaline coursing through their veins. They burst out into the cool night air of the alley, mounting their horses. As they galloped out of Silver Creek, leaving the lights of the town behind, Adeline looked over at Silas. He was smiling, a real, broad smile. "We did it!" she shouted over the wind. "Not yet," Silas shouted back. "We cut off the head of the snake here. Now we have to make sure the body doesn't come looking for us." "What do you mean?" "We're going to St. Louis, Adeline," Silas said, looking at the moon. "I think it's time I met my father-in-law properly." Adeline felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. They weren't just defending their home anymore. They were coming for revenge. It was a balmy evening in June 1886 when the heavy oak doors of the Miller estate in St. Louis were pushed open, not by a servant, but by a force of nature. Josiah Miller was hosting a dinner party. Lucinda was holding court at the head of the table, laughing at a suitor's joke. The laughter died instantly as two figures stepped into the candlelight. Silas Kincaid wore a new suit, though it strained across his massive shoulders, and he still wore his gun belt. Beside him stood Adeline. She wore a dress of deep emerald silk that Silas had bought her in Denver, but she wore no veil. Her hair was swept up, leaving the silver scar on her cheek, fully exposed to the gaslight. She didn't look down. She looked radiant, dangerous, and utterly unafraid. "Adeline," Lucinda whispered, dropping her fork. We thought you were dead." "Disappointed?" Adeline asked, her voice carrying clear and strong across the room. Josiah stood up, his face purple. "What is the meaning of this? You beast! You were supposed to stay in the mountains." Silas stepped forward. The guests shrank back. "I came to deliver a message, Miller. Your man Holloway didn't make it back, and your contract is ash." He reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud, spilling raw, glittering nuggets of copper and silver ore onto the fine linen tablecloth. "The mine you wanted to steal?" Silas grinned, his eyes cold. "It's producing, and it belongs to my wife. Every ounce of it." Josiah stared at the wealth on his table, greed warring with fear. "Adeline, surely we can discuss this. You are my daughter." "No," Adeline said, stepping up to her father. She looked at the man who had traded her away like livestock. "I am Adeline Kincaid, and I didn't come here for your money, and I didn't come for your apology. I came to thank you." "Thank me?" Josiah blinked. "You thought you were sending me to hell." Adeline smiled, and it was the most beautiful, terrifying thing the room had ever seen. "But you sent me to the only man on earth who could see me. You gave me a kingdom, Father, and you gave me a love you will never understand." She turned to Lucinda, whose perfect face was twisted in envy. "Keep the portraits, Lucy. I'll keep the reality." Adeline took Silas's arm. "Take me home, husband. The air here is stale." They turned and walked out, leaving the stunned silence of the St. Louis elite behind them. They never returned to the city. Historical note: according to Montana territorial records from 1902, the Kincaid Ranch grew to become one of the largest privately held estates in the Rockies. Locals spoke of a woman named Adeline, who ran the local school and a hospital for minors. It is said that when Silas Kincaid died in 1914, they found a locket around his neck. Inside wasn't a picture of a young beauty, but a sketch of a woman with a scar, and the inscription, "My perfect match." And that is the incredible story of Adeline and Silas. They tried to break her by sending her to a beast, but they didn't realize that a diamond is only forged under pressure. Adeline proved that beauty isn't about a flawless face, it's about a flawless spirit. She didn't just survive the winter, she conquered it. What do you think? Did Josiah deserve a harsher punishment? Or was Adeline's success the best revenge? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another tale of romance, revenge, and the wild frontier. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that they are worth more than what the world tells them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.